All right, out of respect for everyone's time, we will go ahead and begin. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I know it's a busy time of year and a busy time of day. So thank you for joining us for this presentation, Chinese Tourism Traveler Sentiment and 2022 Outlook. As you may have just heard a moment ago, this session is being recorded. It'll be available to our members on our education page probably the next couple of days or so. So if you want to go back and listen to it again, watch it again, or share it with any colleagues, feel free to do so. We will be using both the Q&A and chat feature for questions. However, Sienna will be addressing your questions at the end. So you're free to pose questions along the way, but they will be discussed at the end of the presentation. And speaking of the presentation, I will go ahead and introduce our speaker today. It's Sienna Peroulis-Cook, who is Director of Marketing and Communications at Dragon Trail International. So Sienna, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today, and thank you to Todd and the NTA for organizing this webinar and allowing me to come and share some fresh insights on the Chinese travel market, sentiment around travel to the US, and prospects for 2022 and beyond. As Todd mentioned, my name is Sienna Peroulis-Cook. I'm Director of Marketing and Communications at Dragon Trail International. I grew up mostly in Vermont, a few years in California, but I was born in the UK, and that's where I'm based today. I've had a lifelong interest in China and lived in Beijing between 2007 and 2014. I've been working with Dragon Trail for about 5 years now, creating resources on the Chinese travel market and digital landscape, including articles and reports, our monthly webinar series, and the 2019 book, China, the Future of Travel. So on our agenda today, I'm going to start with a brief update on what is going on in China now, the current travel restrictions, and prospects for 2022 in terms of relaxation of those restrictions. Then I will get to the main part of the webinar, which is a first look at the results of our December 2021 China Travel Market Monitor. Now, this is a survey of more than 1,000 Chinese who have outbound travel experience in the past 5 years. And the survey sample is statistically representative in terms of age range, gender balance, city tier, and other demographic factors. Now, on the whole, I think the survey results are actually really positive for US destinations and travel businesses, and hopefully they'll also shed some light on what kind of marketing is going to resonate best with this audience, what their concerns are about outbound travel, and also what their expectations will be when they return to international travel. As Todd mentioned, at the end of the webinar, we'll have time for Q&A. So please do feel free to send in questions at any point during the webinar, and then I'll do my best to answer as many as possible at the end of the webinar. One more thing to note before getting started is I will be sending out today's presentation slides to everybody alongside the link to watch the recording of the webinar. So you'll have all of the materials from today to review for your own personal reference or to share with any colleagues who you think might be interested but weren't able to attend the live session today. So before launching into the webinar, I'd just like to give a very quick introduction to Dragon Trail International for those of you who might not know us. So we are a marketing solutions company focused on Chinese outbound travel. The company was founded in 2009, and it's headquartered in Beijing with offices in Shanghai and Xi'an, as well as an international office in London. Our services include B2C and B2B digital marketing, hybrid and virtual events, strategy consulting, and research. We're proud to work with leading tourism brands all around the world, including tourism boards, attractions, airlines, cruise lines, hotels, and other travel businesses. Dragon Trail's research division was founded in 2019 in order to provide insights to help our clients to optimize their marketing to Chinese consumers and the Chinese travel trade. We have worked with tourism boards.
Hey everyone, it looks like Sienna is back with us. So I will give her just a moment to get up and running, and we'll pick up where we left off. Hey, Sienna.
Hi, I am so sorry, everybody. Absolute nightmare. I don't know what happened. My computer totally froze and I had to restart it and reconnect to everything. This has never happened to me before, and let's hope it doesn't happen again. But thank you very much to all of you who stuck around and for bearing
They all
with
stuck
me.
around, Sienna. You didn't lose a single one,
Oh,
actually.
thank you so much. Well, you must have entertained them really well.
I stayed quiet, which is best for all of us, actually.
Oh, well, thank you so much, guys. So I was just talking about Dragon Trail research. This is where it froze for me. I realized it wasn't working. And I was just going on to say that our research can help gauge travel sentiment, find out more about your core market, and also understand people's travel plans and their motivations. And in addition to consumer research, our database of over 60,000 Chinese travel trade professionals also means that we can conduct surveys of the Chinese travel industry. So without further ado, let us talk about Chinese outbound travel with an update and a recap on the state of the Chinese travel market and what's going on with outbound travel now. And I'm going to turn off my video for this part so that you can just see the slides. Okay. So domestically, China's tourism market started to recover already in the spring of 2020, just when the rest of the world was going into lockdown. And despite COVID-related setbacks from time to time, it has remained one of the world's most resilient travel markets during the pandemic period. But of course, during this time, there has been next to no outbound tourism. So the big question that everybody wants the answer to is, when are Chinese tourists going to start traveling internationally again? Now, this year, 2022, should be the one, but the question remains as to exactly when. So while no one knows the precise answer to this, we can make some educated guesses. First of all, we're going to have to wait until after the Olympics and the Paralympics. These are extremely important events to run safely and without any potential disruptions. So that brings us up to mid-March. I would say in a very best case scenario, we would start to see international travel opening up in the late spring to early summer. And this is also what Ctrip, China's largest travel company, is predicting as well. Last week, the China Tourism Academy projected a 20% growth in outbound and inbound travel this year compared to last year, recovering to 20% of 2019's levels. Now, the China Tourism Academy is probably the closest thing we have to any kind of official policy announcement. So it's a good indication as well about this year. However, to be totally transparent, there are some other upcoming events and scenarios that could cause a delay with travel reopening. For events, we have the Asian Games in September, as well as the 20th National Party Congress in October into early November. And events aside, we're also going to need to see what happens in the rest of the world in terms of variants and pandemic control. As you all well know, the pandemic has been full of surprises so far, but hopefully this is the year when things are going to start to wind down. But what exactly is the situation now for outbound and inbound travel from China? So for nearly 2 years, outbound group tourism and travel packages that include a minimum of flight and hotel bookings have been officially banned. However, individual travel has never been banned. So although it has been officially discouraged, an independent Chinese tourist could technically get on a plane and fly to a country that is allowing inbound Chinese tourists at any time. But apart from the advice not to leave, there are a number of other factors that complicate this. And the biggest issue is quarantine on return. It's a minimum of 14 days in a centralized facility, and it must be self-financed. Most people don't have the time, money, or desire to do this unless the travel is absolutely essential. Second, flight tickets are extraordinarily expensive, and flights into China are often canceled as a result of imported COVID cases. Thirdly, if the traveler doesn't already have a passport or their passport has expired, it's not possible to get a new one for any non-essential travel purposes. And then one more issue is that while many countries around the world do recognize the vaccines that are made in China, others do not. And this could mean either that the travelers who they would need to quarantine when they get to the destination country, or they wouldn't be allowed in as tourists at all. Now, this is an issue that is not facing North American destinations because both the US and Canada do accept Sinopharm and Sinovac vaccinations for entry as a tourist. Okay, so now we are ready to get to the survey results. I will first be presenting some data from Dragon Trail's November China Travel Market Monitor, and this is one that we conducted just using our own questions. But most of the data today will come from the December China Travel Market Monitor. And the questions for that we came up with together with the NTA based on questions and feedback from NTA members. So hopefully the results will answer some of your questions about the Chinese market. As I mentioned before, there's actually a lot of good news to share. Despite political issues, the pandemic, and plenty of negative media coverage, the US has not lost its appeal as a destination for Chinese travelers. In our November China Travel Market Monitor, we asked respondents to select their first and second choice destinations for their next outbound trip. And to do this, they had a drop-down menu that listed every country in the world. The US turned out to be the third most popular destination after Japan and France. It was chosen by over 16% of respondents, and 69% of those had previously traveled to the US and wanted to go again. I will talk more about Chinese travel trends later on, but looking generally at the market, nature and culture stand out as the leading purpose for future overseas trips. However, motivations do vary by country, and we found that business travel and study abroad are of much greater significance to Chinese planning to visit the US than for those who picked other travel destinations. So you can see on the chart here, for business travel and study abroad, the dark blue dot is the US, and just how much significantly further along that is than the dots for the other destinations. So now we get to our December survey results. We asked our survey panel of 1,045 Chinese international travelers if they were interested in visiting the US, and 38% of them said yes. This is a very good outcome. Looking at the 2.83 million Chinese who visited the US in 2019, that represented only around 4.5% of Chinese outbound trips that year. What's also interesting is that around 2/3 of Chinese who said they wanted to visit the US have not chosen a destination yet. So this is a big opportunity for DMOs and attractions. As you can see from the graph here, the percentage that said they didn't want to visit the US because it is unfriendly is relatively small. So that should alleviate some concerns. But on the other hand, you can see that the biggest factor dissuading Chinese travelers from wanting to visit the US is the perception that it is unsafe. China has always been a very safety conscious market, and this is going to be paramount in post-pandemic travel. At this point, there's definitely still time to remedy this perception and do more to publicize safety measures and a safer image of your destination. And I'll talk more about what that might entail later on. So looking at the next question is, what kinds of travelers should you expect to return first? Now, looking at the overall Chinese outbound travel market, family travel with children stands out for people's first outbound trip, followed by couples travel. When we look specifically at those travelers who said they wanted to visit the US, we see that travelers from first-tier and new first-tier cities are more likely than those from second-tier cities to visit. For those of you who might not be familiar with China's city tier classification, cities in China are divided into tiers from 1 to 5 based on their size and economic and cultural development. There are 4 first-tier cities, and that's Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen. And then there are 15 cities that are called new first-tier cities, and those include Xi'an, Hangzhou, Chengdu, and Nanjing, I think. There's a full list on the Dragon Trail website. We also noticed, apart from city tier, that Chinese who have higher income levels are more likely to say that they want to visit the US, and they are the most likely to already have a US destination in mind for their trip. But additionally, we found that higher city tiers and higher income levels are correlated with greater safety concerns. So again, it's important to stress how key it is to get across the message that your destination is safe. Among the 13% of respondents who had a US destination in mind, New York City and California stood out as the most popular. For New York, interest is very centered on the city, but for California, it's slightly more diverse. So for this question, we asked respondents if they had a destination in mind for the US to write it in. So it was an open-ended question. And so we had some respondents who wrote in California, some who wrote in Los Angeles or San Francisco, and then others wrote in LA attractions such as Hollywood or the Staples Center. Hawaii, Florida, and Texas also came up as top destination states. These results are not particularly surprising given that New York and California were the most popular US destinations for Chinese tourists before the pandemic. But don't forget that actually more than 260 of the survey respondents said that they wanted to visit the US but hadn't yet decided where to go. And that's nearly twice as many as those who already had a destination in mind. Now, one really interesting part of our research is a question to help identify how Chinese outbound travelers see the US in terms of brand archetypes. Brand archetypes are based on the work of psychiatrist Carl Jung, who proposed 12 universal characteristics that are cross-culturally recognizable. It shows us which characteristics are connected with different categories and brands within each category, so that we can better prepare campaigns that shape or reshape the image related to the destination. Brand archetypes can explain why we feel connected to some brands over others on a deeper level. And people have different bonds to different brands. And in the current environment, we feel that it's vital to measure and remeasure the US's destination image to optimize campaigns and messaging. So for this study, brand archetypes are measured by a set of 24 adjectives, and each archetype is associated with 2 of those adjectives. So we had a list of 24 adjectives, and we asked respondents to choose all of the adjectives on the list that they associated with the United States. And the result is, for Chinese travelers, the US's brand leans very heavily to the explorer category. The explorer is adventurous and daring. It thrives in the realms of the unknown, seeks freedom and liberation, and is constantly on a journey of self-discovery. An explorer brand challenges itself, seeks the great outdoors and unknown lands, and breaks free from conformity. Industries known for fitting the explorer archetype include adventure travel, SUVs, extreme sports, and outdoor equipment. Now, the good news here for the US is that there are very strong travel trends in China now for outdoor sports, exploration, and road trips to more remote off the beaten track destinations. So there's a lot for US brands to tap into and take advantage of to connect with Chinese consumers and their travel desires. I wanted also to share one example of a US destination marketing campaign that I think fits in really well with this brand archetype. So you can see that in the middle picture on the screen here where it says Maverick helicopter. So this was part of a Chinese influencer campaign that we organized for the Las Vegas Tourism Board a few years back. We sent 2 Chinese influencers to Las Vegas, and one of those 2 was a man, Harry, who specialized in things like adventure travel, outdoor sports, and road trips. And his trip to Las Vegas included zip lining and a helicopter trip. So this was all very on brand for him, and both the influencer and the activities that he did really fit that explorer type. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit and go through some additional survey questions that are less conceptual and more concrete in helping you to understand the plans and demands of the Chinese market. So the first question is about preconditions for travel. We've already discussed some of the big factors that are affecting Chinese outbound tourism and its return, but here we get a sense of what is most important to Chinese travelers themselves. So 60% of our survey respondents said that they would want to wait for outbound travel to resume for a few months before going abroad themselves. And 58% said that quarantine requirements would need to be lifted. We found that older travelers and travelers with children are the most influenced by the quarantine requirements. But that said, 36% of our respondents would be willing to travel if they could just do their quarantine on return at home instead of in a centralized facility. We also found, not hugely surprisingly, that younger travelers were the most affected by flight ticket pricing. So next we asked about safety requirements, and I think this is very interesting because with the last question, we get a sense of what might be holding Chinese travelers back from traveling, but they aren't necessarily things that you can do anything about. You have to wait until the official policy in China changes. But these kind of must-have safety requirements that Chinese travelers say that they'll be looking for are especially relevant to attractions and retailers, and they'll also help you to understand what safety measures to promote about a destination if you are trying to kind of promote this image of your destination being safe. So we asked travelers to rate the importance of 10 safety precautions relating to COVID, and we found that they are all fairly important. So as I said before, this is a very safety conscious market. The most important precautions involved mask wearing on public transport and at attractions, followed by cleaning and the availability of sanitizers. Families with children were the most sensitive to safety factors compared to other groups, and residents of new first-tier cities were the most cautious overall. But we saw particularly strong support for mandatory staff vaccination from residents of first-tier cities. 85% of them said that this was a must-have compared to 75% of survey respondents overall. So where will Chinese travelers be getting their information on safety requirements when they travel? 72% would consult a travel website like Ctrip, 69% would look on Chinese social media, and 67% would consult the Destination Tourism Board's website. Older travelers are more likely to look for pandemic control information on embassy websites, while younger travelers are more likely to look for information on destination business websites. So that would include websites for an attraction, a hotel, a restaurant, things like that. Younger travelers are also more likely to find information from travel bloggers and look at both Chinese and Western social media. Higher income travelers are the most likely of any group to rely on OTAs like Ctrip. Now, our last question related to shopping and which category Chinese shoppers would be likely to spend more on if they could travel overseas. By far the most popular is cosmetics and skincare, followed by clothing and accessories, electronics, and watches and jewelry. Cosmetics and skincare, clothing and accessories, and fragrances all received the most interest from shoppers in first and new first-tier cities, as well as Chinese born in the 1980s and the 1990s. Watches and jewelry also received more interest from higher city tiers, and clothing and accessories were most attractive to Chinese and higher income groups. Not super surprisingly, women were more interested in cosmetics and bags, while men were more likely to spend on electronics, wines and spirits, and tobacco. So we just ran a webinar on recent Chinese travel trends last week, and you can find the recording of that on Dragon Trail's website or on our social media channels. But I wanted to run through a few of the biggest kind of recent trends in Chinese tourism here that have the most major potential for US destinations. So first of all, theme parks were the top tourism activity for China's Gen Z last year, especially with the opening of Universal Beijing Resort. And China has actually been driving the growth of Asia's theme park industry for years already. Second, surfing really started to take off last summer in China. So far, the market for surfing lessons is largely female. And if you're looking to cater to Chinese surfers, do keep in mind that most will still be at a beginner's level. So it's similar to snow sports in the Chinese market. As I mentioned earlier, self-driving and RV tourism has been huge, and it fits very well with that explorer brand archetype. Also, the US has always been the #1 country for Chinese tourists for self-driving travel. So I think there are some really good opportunities here for people who are looking to do road trips outside of China when they get the chance. And finally, camping has taken off in China over the past 2 years, but this camping is generally more like glamping than traditional camping. A lot of the campgrounds that are popular in China now, they provide really comfortable tents and bedding. They supply all the equipment, even things like bug spray, and they are often fully catered with 3 meals a day. So do be aware that the Chinese market could have very different expectations about what camping means than the Western market, where things are a bit more rugged, and it's important to communicate those things in advance to avoid disappointment or misunderstandings. So before moving on to Q&A, I wanted to share a couple of additional resources that you might find helpful. First of all, the Dragon Trail website is full of free resources, and this includes more sentiment surveys, translated reports, webinar recordings, guides to Chinese social media marketing, and more. We will continue to post fresh consumer data there on a regular basis and on our social media channels. So please check those out to learn more in the future, as well as to find out more about the work that we do and services that we provide. Lastly, I have mentioned the China Travel Market Monitor as the source for today's data, but there are more specifics here about the timings for that and other details about how it works. So this is a survey that has run, it's run every month, so it's always available to join as long as there are still spaces left for that month. And our research manager, Meng Fan, is very happy to offer consultation about your survey questions and research goals. She is a research expert, and so she can really help to make sure that the questions that you ask will get you the most useful results, and can also help with interpreting those results. She's also very open to discussing the survey and how it works to help you understand the process if you have questions about it. And there's definitely no obligation for you to then join or commit to doing it right away. While we think that getting the right information and reconnecting to the Chinese market earlier rather than later is going to be advantageous, and this is a really good way to start going about it, we also realize that you might not be ready yet to jump back in immediately. So we are happy to start the dialogue and answer questions now, and then see when you feel the time is right to do more. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and NTA for having me. And thank you very much, everyone, for your patience during my technical difficulties. And I'm now ready to take any questions that you might have.
Yeah, and we do have the Q&A and chat both available if anyone has any questions. So feel free to use either one. Any questions from our attendees? Sienna, this might mean that you just covered it all. Sometimes that's what it means, right?
Well, I do feel that there's a lot of information shared very quickly. So maybe it's good for everybody to get the slides and be able to go over them a little bit more slowly. Check what things are particularly relevant to you. And then if you do have follow-up questions, my contact information is included in the presentation, and you are very welcome to contact me about them.
So Sienna, I do see a question in the chat. If you see it, do you want to just address it audibly there?
Sure. So the question is, how do you see the political tensions between North America and China impacting growth coming out of the pandemic? And so there's certainly tensions, and we have seen in the past many other cases of there being political tensions between China and other countries, and those impacting tourism. But they tend to not impact tourism really in the long term. We can see kind of short-term declining growth, but things do tend to come back. People don't hang on to those feelings forever. And particularly with the US, I think that the results of this survey, the one that we did in December, asking people if they were interested in traveling to the US, and the one we did in November when we just asked people the open-ended question of what their first choice travel destination would be. The fact, especially in November, that in an open-ended question, the US was the third most popular destination in the world. I think that the US is such a strong travel brand that people still really want to visit and have this dream of traveling to the US despite any kind of political situation. So that is it's very good news for us to see that.
So Ryan broke the ice. We have a second question that's coming in Q&A, which is, are the Chinese tour operators back open and in business?
Okay, where is that in the chat?
It was in the Q&A.
Oh, okay, okay. So our Chinese tour operators, so basically a lot of Chinese tour operators or travel agents that focused on outbound travel before, they have shifted to other things during the pandemic, either domestic tourism or even other industries. That said, we still have been running B2B events for multiple destinations around the world where tourism suppliers have the chance to meet with Chinese travel agents that specialize in outbound tourism. And generally speaking, there have been lots of meetings for those and people who are still quite engaged to learn about outbound tourism. But I think at this point, many people who are in that area have kind of had to shift their focus in order to stay afloat for the last couple of years.
Any other questions for Sienna via Q&A or chat? We'll give you another minute or so to chime in. In the meantime, Sienna, would you like to go ahead and put your email address once again in the chat?
Yes.
That way, if folks want to just email, I know that you will be sending out the slides and the recording later, but just in case people want to go ahead and shoot you a question directly, they'll have that information. And while Sienna is doing that, we'll have a last call for questions.
In my personal email, which you could have too, but I'm so used to filling in forms with that one. So that's my work email.
And Sienna, a question just came into the chat. When do you think China may reopen to international visitors?
I imagine that the opening for outbound Chinese tourism and the opening for inbound Chinese tourism are going to go hand in hand. Otherwise, it doesn't particularly make sense if you're letting Chinese people go to a place and come back to not let people from those places come. And I think with some countries also, not the US or Canada, but for instance, with the EU or the UK, they've looked at doing kind of reciprocal things of like, we'll start issuing tourist visas if our citizens can get tourist visas too. So I think that it'll all probably happen together, and I imagine that it will be in kind of Q3 and Q4 of this year. We'll start to see Chinese outbound and inbound travel open up on a limited scale. It might be focused on Asian destinations first, some selected destinations such as definitely Hong Kong, I think will be the first one, and then followed by places potentially Singapore, and then into Southeast Asia, North Asia, and then the rest of the world.
Any other questions for Sienna in chat or in Q&A? And just as a reminder, we will be sending out her slides as well as recording in case you want to go back and digest any of that information that was on those slides. Like Sienna said, there was a lot of valuable information, but you may need to marinate in it a bit to see how it affects your business directly. Anything else for Sienna? All right, well, if there is nothing else, I want to thank those of you who joined us today. Everybody stayed on during that little hiccup, Sienna, so that obviously everyone was looking forward to that information. And thanks to you, Sienna, for providing this valuable information to us today. Again, I encourage all of you to reach out to Sienna if you have any follow-up questions or want more information about the research and the survey itself. So thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you so much, Todd. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Sienna.